Warning: tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, we're going to do probably a pretty long series of videos about building this Elekit TU-8888 push-pull monoblock amplifier. I'm not going to talk about critiquing anything in this series. We're just going to be building it. So let's get busy putting this thing together. Okay, so this is where we are going to deviate from the instructions. I don't like the way they did these speaker jacks whatsoever. I just think this was a really, I don't know, it just seems kind of a chintzy design. And we're going to do something completely different. Well, we're going to be using some of these parts, but some of them we're not. And we're going to be wiring this using a different strategy. So what they did is they give you these. I don't like these speaker jacks either. These are these clear plastic kind of, you know, the ones you see on the $100 amplifiers on Amazon. I mean, they're just cheap. And we're not going to be using these. But what they want you to do is they want you to put it through here, and then, well, actually it's this one's first. Then you put this one on, okay? And then you put some nuts in here, which we're going to do that part. There are these guys right here. And these are what hold it to the back of the chassis. So you stick this little nut like that, and then they want you to put a nut on here, okay? Tighten that down. And then the electrical connection for the speaker output goes from this touching that nut that's threaded on there, and it relies on this nut being tightened up against there, squishing those two nuts together. And so you got this face is touching that, and then it connects through the threads to the speaker jack. And then you also have this electrical connector that's supposed to be soldered onto here that then has this harness that plugs into that. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 different connections that are friction, that hold or just the, you know, pressed up against each other to make the connection. And I read some forum articles about people having issues with the amp not having any sound, and they're like playing the amplifier or running music signal through the amplifier with the output transformer not connected to anything, which is a really bad thing to do for a nice output transformer like these come with. And to me, it just invites, you get a little corrosion on this or a little corrosion on that nut, or you don't get them tight enough, or it clamps down on these little nuts before those tighten up. You know, it clamps down on that little nut when it's sandwiching it instead of sandwiching on that. We're not doing that. We are going to use these plates to mount it with, and we're going to use the mounting hardware, these little thin nuts and stuff it comes with. But we're going to be using these speaker jacks, which I think look way nicer, and they got kind of this black faux carbon with silver, which I think will look way better on the back of the amp. I also don't like the order that they did them, where they have the black in the middle, or the negative in the middle, and then 4 of them on one side and 8 of them on the other. I like having mine with the ground, 4 ohm, 8 ohm. So that's the way we're going to wire it up too. So we're going to use this harness, or use this wire, so that we get the color codes correct. But we're not going to use this plug. So first thing we're going to do is just cut that plug off like that. Okay? And I looked up the color codes or figured them out from looking at these boards. And the brown wire needs to be the ground or the negative, and the green is 4 ohm, and the gray is 8 ohm. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and this is what I do when I'm building my amplifiers, I get these kind of terminals like this, and I direct solder the wire into this little cup. And I don't trust soldering to this rhodium plating or whatever. If you used gold ones, even the gold plating, I don't trust soldering it to that. I want to get to the material that's underneath. Plus, I like making these a little thinner so that they heat up easier. So I get a Dremel tool with a bit like that, and I come in here and do this deal. You see we've ground down to the parent brass material, and it also makes them a little thinner, so it makes it easier to solder to. So we're going to do that to all 3 of these. And if you don't have a Dremel tool, you could do this with a round file or even some sandpaper if you had enough patience to sand through that coating. And so the next thing we do is these little stands here are super helpful for something like this. Okay, so let me move this paper so you can see a little better what I'm doing here. So the trick to soldering these speaker terminals is, as I thinned this metal down a little bit with the Dremel tool, it allows you to heat this up easier. And then you need to get the parent metal hot enough where the solder is actually melting to the parent metal and not just sitting on top of it. It molecularly bonds with the parent metal, and that's what we need to happen. And so we get like our little, let me get the tip clean. We get our solder pool going. We put it up against the metal, and as you can see, I can stick it right there and it melts, but that's not really bonding to the parent metal. You want it where it melts when you touch it on this other side. And there it goes. Now it's hot enough. So go ahead and make a nice pool of solder in there. And then you want to come in with one of these tinned wires that we just cut off that plug-in and stick it into the jack. Let it sit there for 10 or 15 seconds so you know the wire's gotten really hot too. Hold it still while it cools off. And now you've got a speaker jack that is one with the wire. There's no way that's not a good connection or is ever going to have a problem. It does help to have a little water to dip the jack into to cool it off so you don't accidentally burn yourself. And then instead of soldering those wires with that plug that we cut off that plugs into this to this output transformer board, we're going to come in here and just put some nice big fat solder beads on here so that we're assembling the amp. We can strip this wire off. After we cut it to length, we can tin that in and then lay it into that puddle and direct connect. Then you have the wire directly soldered to the speaker terminal that goes right to the output transformer. There's no way that's ever going to have a bad connection. So while we're here, let's go ahead and do these little boards here that do solder onto the output transformer. And then we'll assemble the little speaker connector thing So this is fairly simple. You just put a nice big bead on there, and then you get the wire that's the right color, and you just lay it into the puddle like that. And then you've got a great connection. And this black and violet are the feedback loop connections that go to the main board. And I don't have a problem with these plugs. That's not really my issue. It's the way it sandwiches those connectors that I don't like. So that's that board. And the board on the other side, you do the exact same thing. Let's go ahead and do that too while we're here. And you guys that are here just for the speaker jack thing, or the speaker jack mod, you just have to bear with me a minute here while I solder this other board together for you guys that are assembling the amp and that are following through my little step-by-step tutorial on doing this. You want to make sure you hold the wire in there long enough where it's melting the tinned solder on the wire. And then you want to hold it long enough where you don't get a brittle solder joint after you take the iron away. So this is the primary side of the output transformer that connects to the tubes themselves. You have the B plus that comes in the center, the ultralinear taps, and then the plates of the tubes. So that just plugs into the main board. So that's simple. I'll show you soldering those to the transformer in another episode. Okay, so I've got my 3 connectors here ready to go. And the brown is the ground. So we're going to put the black washer on there. And then the only thing a little different is you got to thread them through these units. And so this one is going to be, I'm going to have the ground on that side like that. Whoop, wrong color. Let's don't get these mixed up. Brown is the ground. We want that one on that side. You can put them in any order you want, but I want to do them in this order. And then the next one is going to be the green. That's the 4 ohm. And for me, it's just familiarity. All my amps have the terminals laid out like this, where you have ascending impedances from the ground. And it just make it easier for me to remember how these things are wired up. Finally, we have the 8 ohm on the end, like that. So the next one is you take, and I believe this is board 6, call it unit 6. This is unit 5. And you put unit 5, same thing. You're going to run these 3 wires through. And you could solder the wires on after. I'd rather not put the heat into these little circuit boards. So there's no reason not to just do the wires when you're doing the initial little solder puddle. So then you want to use the thin nuts that came on those cheap little clear plastic speaker jacks. I just feel this is a much better way of attaching the speaker jacks to the output transformer than relying on the sandwich of the circuit boards to keep the connection. I mean, I guess that's their clever way of doing it, where you don't have to solder onto the speaker terminals or grind off any of the plating to get it to really get a good solder connection, or worrying about people not getting the speaker jacks hot enough. But if you just get them nice and hot, you're not going to have any problem. And then You can use any sort of wrench. I've got this giant crescent wrench just sitting here, which is probably a little overkill for this, but so we have that little looking assembly there. Now the last thing you do is you put these 3 nuts sitting in there like that, and then you get this last unit, which is unit 4, and doing it the way we are, you need to thread these wires through like that. And then I'm going to use these thicker nuts that came with these speaker jacks. Let's do the center one first, that sandwiches this whole thing together like that. As you can see, it basically is doing the same assembly process, and it's going to attach to the back of the amplifier in the same way. But electrically, this board's not part of the speaker jack connection, and it's not relying on this being perfectly parallel, which it looks fairly parallel, but I don't know if it's perfectly parallel or not. And you know, the tightness of these nuts, while we're going to get this pretty snug, that's not what's electrically connecting the speaker terminals to the output transformers. So there we go. And then these will just pull up like this, and we'll put a wire tie on there and then run this up to the output transformer. So that's my speaker jack mod, and this looks like a good place to wrap up this segment. So let's wire up the magic of this amplifier, these Lundell transformers. And as I've said before, circuit's important, but without good transformers, it's not going to perform. And we've got this 5K push-pull Lundell output transformer that are made in Sweden. And I know that these are an option on some of the other amplifiers, but this is what this kit comes with standard, is with this transformer. And you can see it's kind of a strange looking deal. It's definitely a different looking transformer than those EI core transformers that I use in other builds, but this is a really nice unit. And one of the secret sauce to this transformer is it uses a tertiary winding of the output transformer for the feedback loop. But without getting into too much technical stuff, so one of the things that this kit does to simplify the wiring of all these taps that Lundell transformers are famous for is they've got these little circuit boards that solder on the side of it. And as I showed in the previous bit, we're doing the wiring to the actual speaker jacks a little different than the instructions. You'll notice we don't have wires connected to this brown, green, and gray. Those get connected as we're assembling the amplifier, so they're direct connected to the transformer. But really all you do here is come in and solder these boards to these little taps that are sticking out. And make sure you put the iron up against the tap to warm it up. Make sure that it's making a good connection. You don't have just like a pool of solder sitting next to the tap and it's not actually soldered to it. And this really simplifies the output transformer wiring. Have these little circuit boards. So then we be a little careful because you're kind of sitting it on the ends of these taps while you're doing this side, and these things are really heavy. And you just push down and solder it to it. Just like that. And then you come back And you come back and clip the excess off. And you want to, as I pointed out earlier in this video series, you want to leave a little mound of solder. Don't flush cut them. You want it like that, where there's a little mound sticking up. And so now we're going to do the other side. And you just line up these little pins into those holes like that. And we're actually getting near the end of the soldering part of this build, and we're going to actually start assembling the amplifier. And I would solder one end, then the other, like that. And then that one kind of pulled through a little bit. Make sure it cools off before you let go. I think I let go a little too quickly. You don't want to be skimpy with the solder here. And there we go. That's wired up the output transformer. And I just realized I didn't run these wires through this little loom. It's always something. So you watched me make this mistake so you don't have to, right? That's why you can watch these videos. And I can show you what not to do and then how to fix it, right? Not something we can't easily fix here. And there we go. And now it's through its little loom. And we gotta do the same thing on this other side. Guess I wasn't paying attention when I soldered these on here. There we go. Now we're all done. And that wraps up hooking up the leads to this output transformer. That was pretty easy, huh? Well, I hope you're enjoying this build series. If you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. I got this kit from Victor Kung at VK Music up in Canada. I'll put the link below. And as always, DIY audio is fun. So until the next video, have a nice day.